contains disquieting overtones, so Dryer's presence became for Franz a refined torture, an implacable menace. When for the first time after her visit, he had walked the short distance between the gate and the porch, yawning nervously and plucking at his glasses as he went, when for the first time in the capacity of the clandestine lover of the lady of the house he had glanced askance at the innocent Frida and crossed the threshold, rubbing his rain-wet hands, Franz had overwhelmed with such an eerie feeling that in his frightened confusion he had aimed a kick at Tom, who was welcoming him in the drawing-room with an unexpected burst of affection. As Franz waited for his host, he surreptitiously searched the bright eyes, the cushions, and omens of disaster. A high-strung and abject coward in matters of feeling, and such cowards are doubly wretched since they lucidly perceive their cowardice and fear it. He could not help cringing when, with a banging of the doors and dramatic draught, Martha and Dyer entered simultaneously from two different rooms as if in a too harshly lit stage. Then he snapped to attention, and in his attitude felt himself ascending through the ceiling, through the roof, into the black-brown sky, while in reality, drained empty, he was shaking hands with Martha, with Dyer. He dropped back on his feet out of the dark non-existence, from those unknown and rather silly heights, to land firmly in the middle of the room, safe, when hardy Dyer described a circle with his index finger and jabbed him in the navel. Franz mimicked a gasp and giggled, and as usual, Martha was coldly radiant. His fear did not pass, but only subsided temporarily. One incautious glance, one eloquent smile, and all would be revealed, and a disaster beyond imagination would shatter his career. Thereafter, whenever he entered the house, he imagined that disaster had happened, that Martha had been found out, or had confessed everything in a fit of insanity or religious self-immolation to her husband, and the drawing-room chandelier invariably met him with a sinister refulgence. He would weigh every joke of Dryer's, sniff at it with trepidation, checking it for some crafty illusion, but there was nothing. Luckily for Franz, his observant uncle's interest in any object, animated or not, whose distinctive features had imminently grasped, or thought he had grasped, gloated over, and filed away, and would wane with every subsequent reappearance. The bright perception became the habitual abstraction. Natures like this spend enough energy in tackling with all the weapons and vessels of the mind and forced impressions of existence to be grateful to the neutral film of familiarity the film forms between the nudist and its consumer. It was too boring to think that the object might change its own accord and assume unforeseen characteristics. That would mean having to enjoy it again. He was no longer young. He had appreciated the poor bloke's simplicity and vulgarity almost at their first anonymous rendezvous in the train. Thenceforth, in the first moment of actual acquaintance, he had thought of Franz as an amusing coincidence in human form. The form was that of a timid provincial nephew, with a banal mind and limited ambitions. Similarly, Martha, for more than 7 years now, had remained the same distant, thrifty, frigid wife whose beauty would occasionally come alive and welcome him with a paradisial smile she had first fallen in love with. Neither of these images changed basically. They simply became more compactly filled up with fitting characteristics. Thus, an experienced artist sees only that which is in keeping with his initial concept. On the other hand, Dyer would feel a kind of humiliating itching when an object did not immediately yield to his voracious eye, did not assume obediently such a posture as to give him a chance to wrestle with it. A couple of months had passed since the car accident. He had time to make his will, as he had intended to do all along on his 50th birthday, which, bless her cold heart, his only inheritor had let pass without a shadow of celebration, and still he could not determine a silly little thing about his chauffeur, which, if true, would certainly lead to another accident sooner or later. With a twitch of his nostril, he would prove the man's tobacco reeked for a gayer smell, observe him when he went bow-legged around the car, and at the most perilous hour, Saturday night, would unexpectedly summon him and laboriously conduct a trivial conversation while he watched whether or not he did not behave in too free a fashion. He hoped that some day he would be told that the man, alas, was not fit to come, but alas, that day never came. At times it seemed to him that Icarus was taking turns with a little faster, a little more cheerfully than usual. It was just on such a day of carefree swerves, made especially interesting by the fact that the first real snow of the year had fallen on the eve, and had now melted into a slippery mush, that he noticed a hatless man through the window, looked exactly as if he had hinges for joints, crossing the street with mincing steps. That reminded him of his talk with the amiable inventor. When he reached his office, he promptly had and called at the Montevideo, and was very pleased when old Sarah Reach, his secretary, announced that the inventor would be right over. However, neither Dyer nor Miss Reach, who had his own dreadful troubles, nor anyone at all in the world ever found out that a lonely and homesick inventor had happened to live in the very same room when Franz had spent the night of his arrival, where a great ash tree, now leafless, was visible from the window, and where one could notice, if one looked very carefully, that some minute glass dust had become embedded in the cracks of linoleum by the washstand. It is significant that fate would have lodged him there of all places. It was a road that Franz had traveled, and all at once fate remembered and sent in pursuit this practically nameless man, who of course knew nothing of his important assignment, and never found anything about it, and for that matter no one else ever did, not even old Enricht. "Welcome," said Dreyer. "Sit down." The inventor did. "Well," said Dreyer, toying with his favorite pencil. The inventor blew his nose, carefully wrapped up his results, and spent a long time tucking the handkerchief, an article that some invention should have long replaced, into his pocket. "I come to you with the same offer," he said at last. "Any additional details?" suggested Dreyer, penciling concentric blue circles on his blotter. The inventor nodded and started to speak. The telephone at the desk buzzed. Dreyer gave his visitor a gentle smile and energetically put the receiver to his ear. "It's me. I forgot. Did you say you would not be back for supper tonight?" "That's right, my love. And you'll be home late?" "After midnight, meeting on board of festivities. Go to a restaurant with Franz or something. I don't know. Maybe I shall." "Wonderful," said Dreyer. "Goodbye. Oh, wait. If you want the car, hello." But she had already hung up. The inventor was pretending not to listen. Dreyer noticed this and said with a coy snicker, "That was my little girlfriend." The inventor smirked indulgently in response and resumed his explanations. Dreyer began a new set of concentric circles. Miss Reich brought a batch of letters and silently disappeared. The inventor continued to talk. Dreyer threw down the pencil, reclined limply in his armchair, and surrendered to the fascination. "What was that?" he interrupted. "The noble slowness of a sleepwalker's progress?" "Yes, if desired," said the inventor. "Or, at the other extreme, the restrained agility of the convalescent." Go on," Dreyer said, closing his eyes. "This is pure witchcraft." Six. An unprepossessing, sullen little cafe not far from where Franz lives. 3 men engrossed in a silent game of skat, the wife of one of them, pregnant and veil pale, sleepily following their game. A plain girl, with a nervous tick, leafing through an old picture magazine and stopping at the Bessie death of a riddle. An indelible pencil had rapaciously filled in most of the crossword's blank squares. A lady in a moleskin coat, the improprietress of the place, and a young man in tortoiseshell glasses, sipping cherry brandy and gazing into each other's eyes. A drunken and employed-looking chap tapping on the thick glass behind which coins had bunched together, forming a middle sausage. The losses of all those who had put a coin in the slot and had moved the handle or activate the little tin juggler with his tiny bright balls following the winding grooves. The counter, chilled by the beer foam, gives off a fish-like sheen. The proprietress has 2 green wool soccer balls for breasts. She yawns as she looks toward a dark nook where the waiter, half concealed by a screen, is devouring a mountain of mashed potatoes. On the wall behind her talks a cuckoo clock of carved wood surmounted by a pair of antlers, and beside it there is an oleograph depicting the meeting of Bismarck and Napoleon III. The rustle of card players grows softer and softer. It has now stopped altogether. "You choose well. You can be sure nobody will see us here." He caressed her hand on the table. "Yes, but it's getting late, darling. Maybe it's time to go." "Your uncle won't be back till midnight, or later. We have time. Forgive me for dragging you to such a squalid place." No, not at all. I told you it was quite a good choice. Let's imagine you are a Heidelberg student. How nice you would look in a caravis. And you are a princess incognito? I like us to drink champagne with couples dancing around us and beautiful Hungarian music." She propped her elbow on the table, drawing back the skin of her cheek with her fist. Silence. "Tell me, would you like to eat something? I'm afraid you have grown still thinner." "Oh, what does it matter? All my life I've been unhappy, and now you are with me." Motionless, the players gazed at their cards. The puffy woman leaned exhausted against her husband's shoulder. The girl had lapsed into thought, and her face had ceased twitching. The picture magazine's pages drooped on their stick like a flag in the calm. Silence, torpor. Martha was the first to stir. Franz, too, tried to shake off that strange drowsiness, blinked, tugged at the lapels of his jacket. "I love him, but he is poor," she said jokingly, and suddenly her expression changed. She imagined that she, too, was penniless, and that here, in this shabby little tavern, among befuddled workmen and cheap floozies, in this deafening silence, with only that clock clucking, a sticky wine-glass before each, the 2 of them were whiling away their Saturday night. She fancied with horror that this tender pauper really was her husband, her young husband, whom she would never, never give up. Darned stockings, 2 modest dresses, a broken comb, 1 room with a bloated mirror, her hands coarse from washing and cooking, this tavern for 1 Reichsmark. You could get royally drunk. She felt so terrified that she dug her nails into his hand. "What happened, dearest? I don't understand. Get up," she said. "Pray and let's go. It's so stuffy in here I can't breathe." As she inhaled the matter-of-fact cold of the night, she instantly regained her wealth, and pressing against him, rapidly switched her feet so as to be in step with him. He groped for her and found her warm wrist among the folds of her furs. Next morning, as she lay in bed in her pretty, bright room, Martha recalled her fanciful fears with a smile. "Let us be realistic," she reassured herself. "It is all quite simple. I simply have a lover. That ought to be embellished, not complicate my existence. And that is just what it is, a pleasant embellishment. It is by chance, by strange. She could find no specific direction for her thoughts. Franz's street terminated in a dead end, which her mind reached invariably. She could not imagine, say, that Franz did not exist, nor that some other admirer was floating out of a mist with a rose in his hand. For as he came nearer, it was always Franz. The day, like all days, came to her suffused and colored by her passion for Franz. She tried to think of the past of those impossible years when she did not know him, but it was not her own past she conjured up. It was his little town where she had happened to stop on her way grew up in her thoughts, and there in the haze was Franz's white, green-roofed house, never seen by her in real life, but described by him many times, in the brick schoolhouse around the corner, and the frail little boy with glasses, when Franz had told her about his childhood, was more important than anything she had actually experienced, and she did not understand why that was so, and argued with herself in an attempt to refute what impinged on her sense of conformity and clarity. Particularly painful was that inner discord when she had attended to some household project, or ponder an important purchase that in no way concerned Franz. For example, at odd moments the idea of acquiring a new car kept cropping up, and then she would tell herself that this had nothing to do with Franz, that he was being left out and somehow cheated, and despite her long-standing dream of substituting a certain fashionable make of limousine for that somewhat seedy Icarus, all the fun of such acquisition was spoiled. A dress that she would wear for Franz, or a Sunday dinner that she could compose of his favorite dishes, these matters were different, and at first all these misgivings and pleasures were strange to her, as if she had grown 10 years younger, and was learning to live in a new way, and needed time to get accustomed to it. Another perplexity stemmed from the fact that her house, of which she had grown ever fonder since Franz had become practically a member of the family, contained someone else beside him and her. There he was, big as life, tawny mustached and ruddy, eating at one table with her and sleeping in the adjacent bed, demanding her attention in one way or another. His financial affairs interested her even more than in that they already very distant year, when a lot of ballast jettisoned from the balloon of inflation had come pouring into his pockets, where it turned into that alchemistical dream, valuta. As before, he told her little. This interest of hers in Dreyer's ventures did not combine organically with the new, piercing, moaning, and throbbing meaning of her life. She felt she could not be fully happy without such a blending of bank and bed, and yet she did not know how to achieve harmony, how to eliminate the discord. He had once shown her the slip of paper on which he had totaled up for her benefit his fortune in round numbers. "Is it enough?" he asked with a smile. "What do you think?" There were those 700,000 untouchable dollars in a safe in Hamburg. There was another fortune in stocks. There were considerable resources of a more fluid and changeable nature that constituted a blood system of his business. There was the will he recently made, which had cost her 2 nights of strenuous love-making, but which had completely excluded, thanks goodness, a wayward young brother in South Africa, who she suspected was very much looking forward to his share. "So we are practically millionaires," she said, with one of those rare resplendent responses, for which her husband was ready to pay considerably more than he owned. On the saddleback, my darling," he answered. No matter what happened, she meditated. At the exchange or in his frivolous transactions there remained sufficient funds for many years of idle life until, say, she was 60, or say 58, and Franz still ardent 45. However, as long as Mr. Dreyer existed, he must continue to earn. Therefore, veering from enthusiasm to a show of anxious gloom, she urged him to accumulate more in Hamburg and gamble less in Berlin, and coldly gave him back to the slip of paper. They were standing by the desk where a parasol held his lighted lantern, and one could tell by the peculiar stillness muffling the villa that snow was falling, smothering the garden in dark, dark white. December turned out to be colder than usual, with spectacularly low temperatures to be eagerly noted by the forgetful old-timers of the press who had gone through the same rigmarole a couple of years earlier. Dreyer gave his watch a worried glance. The 3 of them were going to a variety show, like a child he was afraid to be of late. Martha reached for the newspaper lying on the table and looked through the advertisements and the local news, learning that a luxurious villa was for sale for 500,000 Reichsmark, and the car was overturned, killing its occupant, the famous actor Hess, on his way to his sick wife's bedside. "Good God," she exclaimed, "this is unheard of." In the adjacent boudoir, Franz was listening without much interest to the radio's rich voice giving details of the crash. The vast theater was crowded. Its enormous stage was still curtained. They squeezed into one of those exceptionally narrow boxes in which one becomes so acutely aware of an uncomfortable, tangly and tinkly thing a pair of human legs is. It is especially hard on lanky Franz. It is as if not enough that his lower extremities had grown grotesquely lengthened. Martha, strictly adhering to every rule of adultery, pressed the side of her silky knee against his awkwardly bent right leg, while Dryer, sitting to his left and a little behind, leaned lightly against his shoulder and kept tickling his ear with the corner of the program he was consulting. Poor Franz was torn between the fear that his husband might notice something and the delight of feeling the silly sparks coursing through his body. "Such a huge theater," he muttered, slightly shifting his shoulders so as to escape from Dryer's repulsive golden-haired hand. "I can imagine how much they make every night. Let me see, about 2,000 seats." Dryer, as he went through the program for the second or third time, exclaimed, "Ah, that will be good. Trick cyclists." The lights dimmed slowly. The pressure of Martha's knee increased recklessly, but then relaxed as the orchestra began to play a potpourri from Lucia de Lammermoor, which, as in the circumstances, was pretty apt, though lost on our audience. There were shown many entertaining things. Martha found the program very acceptable. Dryer thought it a jolly good show. Franz loved every bit of it. A man in a top hat juggled dummy bottles, to which he suddenly added to his hat. 4 Japanese flew hither-thither and rhythmically creaking trapezes, and while pausing in between stunts tossed to each other a bright handkerchief with which they fastidiously wiped their hands. A clown, constantly on the point of losing his baggy trousers, flopped over the stage, emitting a sharp whistle as he skidded before falling with a whack on his face. A horse so white it must have been powdered delicately played pace in time to music. A crazy family of cyclists extracted all that was humanly possible and more from the properties of the wheel. A black, lustrous seal gave 30 cries like a drowning bather, and then slithered smooth and slick as if greased down a board into the green water of a pool, where a half-naked girl greeted the happy beast with a kiss on the nose. Now and then Dryer grunted with pleasure and nudged Franz. After the seal had been received its ultimate reward, a live mackerel with its succulently snapped up in midair and galloped off its flippers, the curtain was drawn for the public to repick themselves, as the French say. When it opened again, a woman in silver shoes and speckled evening dress stood bathed in light in the center of the darkened stage with a luminous violin to which she applied a star-flashing bow. The spotlight diligently drenched her now in pink and now in green. A diadem shimmered in her brow. Her playing was languorous and really delicious, and suffused Martha with such excitement, such exquisite sadness, that she half closed her eyes and found Franz's hand in the darkness, and she experienced the same sensation, a poignant rapture in harmony with their love. The musical phantasmagoria, as that item was listed, sparkled and swooned. The violins sang and moaned. The pink and green were joined by blue and violet, and the Dryer could stand it no longer. "I have my eyes and ears closed," he said in a weepy whisper. "Let me know when this obscene abomination is over." Martha gave a start. Franz was all that was lost, that he had seen them holding hands. At the same moment the stage grew black and the house thundered in an avalanche of applause. "You understand absolutely nothing about art," said Martha dryly. "You only disturb other people who want to listen." Dryer exhaled in noisy relief. Then, with fussy gestures, with swift jerks of his eyebrows, like a man who is in a hurry to forget, he looked up at the next number of the program. "Oh, that's more like it," he said. "The gutter perchers, whatever they are, than a world-famous conjurer." Close call, Franz was thinking at that moment. That time it was really a close call. Phew. We've got to be extremely careful. Of course, it's wonderful sitting here and knowing she's mine, and he's sitting next to us and not knowing, but it's also dangerous. The performance concluded with a motion picture, as was still customary in circuses and music halls ever since the first bioscope was shown there as a fascinating curiosity. On the flickering screen, strangely flat after the live stage, a chimpanzee in degrading human clothes performed human actions degrading to an animal. Martha laughed heartily, remarking, "Just look how smart he is." Franz cuckolded his tongue in amazement and insisted in all seriousness that it was a dwarf in disguise. When they came out into the frosty street, lighted like yet another screen in the theater's electric signs, the faithful Icarus rolled up with a kind of clownish zeal. Dryer reproached himself for having neglected lately to observe his chauffeur's behavior. Now it was the perfect moment to make a little check. As the chauffeur was hurriedly putting on his fur gauntlets, Dryer tried to catch with his nose the steam issuing from the man's mouth. The chauffeur met his glance, and bearing his bad teeth, innocently raised his eyebrows. Chilly, isn't it? Said Dryer quickly. Not too bad, replied the chauffeur. Not too bad. Can't smell anything, thought Dryer. And yet I'm sure that while he is waiting, flushed face, merry eyes, well, let's see how he is going to drive. The chauffeur drove remarkably well. Franz, respectfully perched on the edge of one of the two folding seats of the luxurious vehicle, listened to the smooth hum of its speed, examined the artificial daisies in their little silver vase, and the speaking tube hanging on its steel hook, the traveling clock which had its own concept of time, and the ashtray with one gold-tipped cigarette butt in it. A snowy night with aureoled street lights ran past the wide windows. I'll get out of here, he said, recognizing a square and a statue. It's just a short walk to my house from here. Oh, I'll take you there, replied Dryer with a little yawn. What's your exact address? Martha caught Franz's eye and shook her head. He understood. Dryer, accustomed as he was to seeing his nephew nearly every evening at his house, had never bothered to ask where he actually lived, and this should be left in silent and propitious obscurity. Franz nervously cleared his throat and said, No, really, I'd like to stretch my legs. As you wish, said Dryer, in the middle of a yawn, and leaning across Franz, knocked on a glass partition with his fist. Why knock? Martha observed crossly. There's a tube for this purpose, isn't there? Franz found himself in a deserted white square. He put up the collar of his raincoat, thrust his hands into the pockets, and hunching over, walked quickly in the direction of the house. On Sundays, on an elegant street in the western section of the city, he would wear his new overcoat and walked quite differently. Now, however, was not the moment for that. The cold was intense. That big city Sunday walk had not been easy to copy. It consisted of stretching one's arms well down and crossing one's hands. Good gloves were essential. Below the last button of one's overcoat, as if to keep in place, one advanced at a very slow strut, with toes pointing out at each stop. Thus promenaded the Kurfürsten darned dandies, sometimes in pairs, now and then looking around at a girl without changing the position of their hands, but merely giving a slight backward jerk of the shoulder. Despite the cold, Franz felt multiplied and exaggerated as one does after a show. He even began to whistle. To heck with her husband. One must be braver. Such bliss is not bestowed on everyone. What was she doing now? She must be home and undressing. That yellow-bristled pig, pestering her, no doubt. To heck with him. Now she is sitting on the bed, peeling off her stocking. 3 or 4 houses more, and she will be naked. I should buy her a lacy nightdress, keep it among my pajamas. When I reach that street lamp, she will lower her head on the pillow. I cross the street, and she turns off the light. They share the same bedroom. No, he is getting old. He will leave her alone. 1 more block, she has fallen asleep. That's my street. Wonderful violinist, and so beautifully staged. There was really something heavenly about it. The conjurer was good, too. Simple tricks, no doubt. Make good money by deceiving people. Now she is sound asleep. She sees my house in a dream, and hears the divine violin. Darn this key. Always starts by behaving as if it had never been in this lock before. Stair light not working again. You could really come crashing down if you happen to trip. And this key is acting up, too. In the dim corridor, by the slightly brighter door of this room, stood old Enricht, shaking his head disapprovingly. He wore a mouse-gray dressing gown and checkered booties. Oh, he said, going to bed after midnight. Shame on you. Franz was about to walk on, but the old man clutched at his sleeve. I can't be angry tonight, he said with a feeling. It's a joyful occasion for me. My wife is back. Congratulations, said Franz. But no joy is perfect, Enrique went on without releasing Franz's sleeve. My little old lady arrived sick. Franz gave a commiserating grunt. There she is, cried the landlord, sitting there in the armchair. Have a look. He opened the door wider, and over the back of the chair Franz glimpsed a gray head with something white pinned to its crown. See what I mean? Said the old man, staring at Franz with shining eyes. And now, good night, he added, and slipping into his room closed the door. Franz proceeded on his way. But then he stopped short and went back. Listen, he said through the door, how about that couch? A hoarse, strained, old womanish voice replied, The couch is already in your room. I gave you my own couch. 2 old crackpots, thought Franz with a squeamish grimace. True enough, the furniture family in his room had grown. It was a hard, decrepit couch of drab gray, patterned with forget-me-nots. Still it was a couch. When Martha came the next day, she wrinkled her nose, and keeping it wrinkled, felt the stuffing, located a sick spring, and raised the shabby fringe. Oh, well, there's nothing to be done, she said at last. I have no intention of quarreling with this old lady. A pity she has returned. 1 more pair of ears. Put those 2 cushions there. Now it looks better. And soon they grew used to it, to its modest coloration, and to the disapproving creaks it emitted in rhythm to their ebullient love-making. It was not only a couch, however, that enriched Franz's room. Once, in a particularly benevolent moment, Dryer gave him some extra cash from his waistcoat pocket. real green dollars, and a fortnight later, just in time for Christmas, a new lodger appeared in Franz's wardrobe, the long-awaited tuxedo. "That's all very well," said Martha, "but it's not all. You have to learn to dance. Tomorrow night after supper we'll put a nice record on the phonograph, and I'll give you your first lesson. It will be rather fun to have Uncle watch us." Franz arrived in his new dinner jacket. She reprimanded him for wearing it needlessly, but found it very becoming. It was 9 o'clock. Dryer was expected any minute. He was very precise in this respect, always telephoning to say he would be so many minutes earlier or later, for he was extremely fond of hearing his wife's soft, smooth, formal voice over the phone, her voice in a kind of early Florentine perspective so different from matter-of-fact reality. Martha was always surprised at his telephoning about those trifling minutes and seconds, and despite her own careful attitude toward measured time, her husband's punctuality in this respect puzzled and irritated her. Tonight he had not telephoned, and yet he was already half an hour late. Out of natural reverence toward the sacred crease of their each trouser leg, Franz avoided sitting down and walked around the room, skirting Martha's armchair, but not daring to kiss her because of the maid's proximity. "I'm hungry," said Martha. "I can't understand why he does not come. Let's start the photograph. You'll teach me while we're waiting. I'm not in the mood. I sat after supper." After 10 minutes passed, she got up abruptly and summoned Frida. A succulent omelette and a bit of liver revived her. "Close it," she said to Franz, indicating the door left open by Frida, whom a bad toothache had been afflicting all day. When Franz returned to his seat, Martha enveloped him in a smile of contented adoration. It so happened that this was the first time she was having supper at home with Franz. Alone with Franz. Yes, the dinner jacket could not be better. She must give him some nice cufflinks instead of those stud-like horrors. "Oh, my own big sweet darling," she said softly, stretching her arm toward him across the dinner cloth. "Careful," whispered Franz, looking around. He did not trust the pictures on the wall. The old baron in the frock coat and his redoubtable double staring down, ready to pounce. The glittering sideboard was all eyes. Cloaked eavesdroppers lurked in the folds of the drapery. A famous practical joker, Curtius Drierson, might be crouching under the table. Good thing at least that Tom had stayed in the front hall, and the maid might come back at any moment. In this castle one must take no liberties. Nevertheless, powerless to oppose her smiling desire, he stroked her bare arm. She slowly caressed his nose with her fingers, beaming and wetting her lips. He had the awful sensation that at that very instant Dryer would suddenly step from behind a curtain, and the jester turned executioner. "Eat, drink, my lord, we are chez nous," said Martha, laughing. She was wearing a black tulle dress. Her lips were painted, her green earrings aflame, and her hair, divided by the mathematically pure line of its parting, glistened more than ever with this melanite luster that was one of the jewels of her beauty. A low lamp with an orange shade cast a voluptuous light on the table. Franz, his worshipful glasses glinting at Martha, sucked on a leg of cold chicken. She leaned toward him, took the glossy-headed, half-bared bone out of his hand, and, laughing with his eyes alone, began gnawing at it with relish, holding it daintily, her little finger cocked, her lashes beating, her lips growing fuller and brighter. "You are ravishing," Franz whispered. "I adore you. If only we could sup like this every night, just you and I," said Martha, with a toss of her head. She chased a momentary frown, and cried in painful and slightly false tone, "Would you pour me some of that precious cognac, please, and let us drink to our union?" "I don't think I'll have any. I'm afraid I would not learn to dance afterwards," said Franz, carefully tipping the diminutive decanter. But what did she care about dancing? She longed to remain in this oval lake of light, basking in the certainty that it would be thus again tomorrow and the next night, and thus to end their lives. My dining room, my earrings, my silver, my Franz. Suddenly she snatched her left wrist to turn the tiny face of her watch, which always contrived to slip around where a blue vein trifurcated. "More than an hour late. Something must have happened. Ring the bell, please. There, it's hanging above you." It irked them that her husband's absence alarmed her. When the heck did it matter if he were late? All the better. She simply had no right to be alarmed. "Why must I ring?" he said, thrusting his hands into his coat pockets. Martha opened her eyes wide. "I think I asked you to press that bell button." Under the long ray of her gaze, he gave away as usual, and rang the bell. "If you have had all you want, you can move into the drawing-room. Have some grapes, though. Here, this bunch." He started upon the grapes, which were large and expensive-looking, but not half as good as the vulgar crams of his native town. The shadow of the electric bell, swinging on its cord, moved like a ghostly pendulum across the tablecloth. Frida came in, looking pale and dazed. Martha asked, "My husband did not call while I was out, did he?" Frida froze still for an instant, then clutched at her temples. "Goodness," she said, "Herr Director did call about 8. Said he was just leaving for home and to go ahead without supper. I'm so sorry."